Hello everyone, it is I, the Horrible Gorg. Today I am here to talk about the video I just released yesterday, which was entitled the Das Vadanya Prologue. Now, I've been talking a lot about this new project, so any of you who watch my live streams or whatever will already know about it. But for those of you that don't, you might be wondering what the fuck that was. Now, I'm obviously a writer. I have a whole series of stories on this channel called Edie Valley. But I don't want to say took a break, because I never actually stopped writing, but I didn't really release any super huge projects for quite a while. Just because of a couple factors, because of health issues for about a year, because I had graduated college and I was trying to figure out what I was doing with writing, and I eventually kind of realized that I was the happiest when I was just posting stories to the internet and just having a direct connection to my audience like that. So I'm back now, finally, after like a good year and a half of not a lot of content. I apologize for that. But today it releases. Well, like yesterday and tomorrow it releases. Now, obviously the prologue doesn't really say a lot about what the story is actually going to be about. So I figured I'd just make this video, which is just a general informational video about Das Vadanya, about the project itself, what it will entail, what it contains, and a couple of warnings as well. Das Vadanya is quite a bit darker than Edie Valley was. It talks about a lot of very fucked up, twisted things. Mostly because I just felt like I wanted to tell a story that talked about really taboo subjects, and that's one of its big themes. So, obviously, there's a lot of really fucked up shit that happens in Das Vadanya. Now, I'm not a big fan of trigger warnings. I think that they spoil a lot of the content of a story, but in this case, they're definitely necessary for certain people. So, if you're worried about common triggers, stick around till the end of the video and I'll talk about that. If you're not worried about it, I highly recommend you skip that section and just end the video before I start talking about it, because again, I feel like the best experience is to go in not being spoiled by anything, but I understand that it's something that some people need, so that will be there at the end when we get to it. So, first, what is Das Vadanya? So it's called Das Vadanya because it takes place in Russia in 1908, a couple of years, about 9 years before the Russian Revolution and 3 years after the first one in Bloody Sunday. It tells the story of a young man who goes out into the middle of the Russian countryside to be a tutor for a family called the Volkovs, a noble family. And he gradually comes to realize that there are some interesting things this family is doing, and he slowly learns about their secrets and the depth of their depravity, as it were. So, that makes it sound like it's like smut or something, which it isn't, I promise. It's, I'm not, without getting into too much, at first it might seem like it's purely a work of historical fiction. I promise you that as far as genre goes, it's very similar to what I've done before. And in fact, I think it's probably a more pure form of a certain genre I've played around with a lot. It'll probably be the closest to the original intention of the genre that I ever get. You'll have no idea what that means right now. Well, some of you probably do, but give it some time. It's a little bit slow. That being said, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what to expect from Das Vadanya, because I don't want people to go into it with the wrong expectations. Because most of what I've written on this channel is Edie Valley, and Edie Valley has a very specific genre, a very specific tone, a very specific everything. And Das Vadanya, I kind of purposefully wanted to make the exact opposite of a lot of that. So Das Vadanya, compared to Edie Valley, is very short. It is a strict novel divided into chapters. I have realized that I like more of an episodic structure just because it's easier to just come up with shit and be able to have branching narratives and whatever. But this project needed to be a traditional novel. So it is divided into chapters. There are right now 19 planned chapters. I just finished writing the 16th one. So there are about 3 chapters left for me to write. Half the reason why you haven't seen so much writing content from me in so long is because I've spent the last 8 months writing this. Yikes. Yeah, it's been a project in the making for quite a while. But like I said, it's only going to be about 60,000 words. So it's the length of your average novel. It'd be a good 300 pages, normally speaking. But that for me is really short. This is the shortest project I've ever written. And it's for good reason. I also wanted it to be much smaller in scope. Edie Valley was pretty big. Edie Valley had a lot of characters, a lot of ideas, a lot of plot lines going on. And I wanted to try my hand at writing a much more tightly constructed story. I wanted to see, if I could pull it off effectively, if I could, structure it properly, if I could, give everybody the proper time they needed to develop, to tell an interesting pseudo-mystery narrative. And I don't mean mystery in the classical sense of, like, whodunit, but more so in, like, the intrigue, the pace in which I slowly reveal information. I really wanted to work on that, because it was a minor flaw that I felt Edie Valley had. So this work is very somber, it's very dark, it's very melancholic. Edie Valley had a lot of humor, a lot of lighthearted moments. Das Vadanya does not have many of those. There are a couple. My sense of humor is rather dark in general, so there are still a couple of moments of rather dark humor. But Das Vadanya is very quiet, is very small, is very contemplative compared to Edie Valley, which was very anime inspired. Das Vadanya is very classic literature inspired, I'd say. Stuff like H.P. Lovecraft, like Edgar Allan Poe, like Blackwood, I guess. I haven't read a whole ton of Blackwood, but stuff like that. The House in Fata Morgana was a big inspiration. That's not really classical literature, but So, and that being said, one of the major things I wanted to focus on as well is Edie Valley is very dialogue forward. I made the narration of Edie Valley, for the most part, kind of simplistic and kind of basic on purpose, so that the dialogue and the characters could really come through very well. Das Vadanya has a lot less going on with its character. Well, not a lot less going on. It's got a lot more going on with its characters, actually, but it has a lot less on the surface going on with its characters. The characters are much more normal. So I really wanted to focus on being able to finally kind of, crack my knuckles and go, all right, let's get flowery with this narration shit. So it's much more writerly than Edie Valley is. Not to like a dumb, like, stuck-up extent. Not to a dumb, pretentious extent, but a little. I wanted to play around with it. I wanted to see how well I could do it, because I hadn't written in a very flowery style in many years, since I was about 17. So I wanted to try it out again. The final thing I wanted to talk about is the characters, because characters are very central to all of the stories I tell. Dragon and I are very different. Dragon is very much, the plot is the most important part of the story. I'm very much the characters are the most important part of the story. And the characters of Das Vadanya, one of the other purposes of Das Vadanya was to try to be a character study, was to try to take, instead of taking a very large cast of characters and only giving each of them a little bit of time to develop, the idea is to take a very small cast of characters, comparatively, there's still like 8 characters, and really try to take the time to develop each of these characters very thoroughly. That being said, at first they seem very normal. Edie Valley was full of weirdos. It was full of teenage mafia bosses and vampire history teachers and Celtic gods and experimenting scientists and stuff like that. Das Vadanya does not have characters like that. Das Vadanya's characters are people you would just find in 1908 in Russia. They're not boring by any means. I would say by no stretch of the imagination are they boring. I really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of what makes people tick, though. And so that's something I tried with this story. I say a lot of I tries, I say a lot of I do's. I tried to do this because I like to try to be humble. But I can say, so that you're not like too turned off, like, wow, it seems you tried a lot of things, did you succeed in any of them? I will say that Dragon has been beta reading this work for me, and he's very impressed with it so far. And I chose Dragon as a beta reader. I mean, A, it's convenient, he lives with me, but B, specifically because he's kind of basically right smack dab in the middle of my target audience. So, if you guys like the stuff Dragon likes, you'll like this. But the other factor as well that I kind of mentioned is that Das Vadanya is very dark. Edie Valley is kind of on the lighter side of the spectrum of stories I write. It had some very dark and fucked up moments, but overall its tone was very hopeful, very optimistic, very funny, very goofy. Das Vadanya is kind of all the way on the other side of the spectrum. Like, if there's like a spectrum of me goofy to dark, Edie Valley is like maybe not quite all the way into goofy, but pretty close. Jameson's is over there, past the level of goofy I usually do. Das Vadanya is all the way on the other end. It's kind of to be my benchmark. Every other story I tell will probably be somewhere in between these. I'm probably not going to write a lot of works like Das Vadanya because it was very, very fucking difficult. It's not a style of story I'm very accustomed to. It was very small, and I was very worried that I wasn't writing enough for a lot of it. But I think I did it well. I probably won't, like I said, I probably won't write a lot of stuff like Das Vadanya, but it was something I wanted to try. So it might not be to the taste of some of you out there who like Edie Valley a lot, but I think for a lot of you it will be. It kind of depends on what you liked Edie Valley for. But I highly recommend, regardless of your opinions, that you at least give it a try, because it's something that I dedicated a lot of time to, and something that means a lot to me in a couple of different ways, and something that I think will be a rather important work going forward in my career and in my creations and stuff like that. So yeah. So, for those of you who do not need the trigger warning section, the chapter one of Das Vadanya is going to be uploaded tomorrow. Ta-da. Then you'll finally get to see what the fuck is going on. You'll realize a couple of things pretty quickly. I'm very excited to unveil it for you all. And so yeah, farewell, adios. I will see you all tomorrow for that video. For those of you who are a little bit worried about trigger warnings and stuff like that, please stick around. I will talk about that now. Let me preface this by saying that this is all a big compromise for me. From talking to Dragon, from talking to a couple other people, I personally am not a fan of trigger warnings, but I understand that that's not everybody. A lot of people have stuff that is painful and stuff that they want to avoid, and that's entirely understandable, and I'm trying to respect that. That being said, I do need to compromise a little bit because I do not want to ruin, I don't want to say the integrity of the story, but I don't want to like ruin a lot of the twists of the story for people who don't necessarily need trigger warnings. So obviously this is a compromise. I'm going to talk about all the trigger warnings here at the end of the video. There are 2 chapters in specifics that I am going to put trigger warnings on, but those are going to be buried in the description. So if you're worried about a couple of specific things that I will mention, just make sure you check the descriptions of the chapters. My plan is that once Das Vadanya is completed, I'm going to upload some kind of a synopsis for those who had to skip some of it or some of the chapters, just so that you can see what you missed, essentially. So yeah, those trigger warnings. There's a lot of them. I first came up with the concept of Das Vadanya when I was about 18. So it's pretty edgy. I think the edginess got tempered with my age, though. But there's still a lot of very dark subjects that get discussed. First of all, there is a general level of violence. A lot of it's rather gory, a lot of it's rather explicit, or a lot of it's rather described in detail. It's not gratuitous by any means. I'm not a big fan of gratuitous violence. I believe that violence doesn't mean anything unless it's used with purpose. So, as far as the violence goes, none of it's way worse than Edie Valley. There were a couple of pretty graphic scenes in Edie Valley, but just a general warning there. The more important thing about the general violence warning, though, is that there are several mentions of self-harm. Maybe 1 or 2 of them are kind of explicit, but none of that's really the central focus of any chapter, but it is mentioned. A thing that is the central focus of a couple of chapters is child abuse. There's a lot of child abuse in Das Vadanya, both verbal and physical. Yeah, that's something that happens quite frequently. Again, it's not used to be edgy, it's used to serve points, whatever. The final big warning, and this is the big one. Das Vadanya contains a lot of sex. Like, a lot of sex. Mostly just, like, none of it's, like, super, like, I don't go in and describe the acts very graphically. I like to focus more on the mindsets of the characters who are experiencing these things, because I think there's a fine line between, artsy sex scenes in porn. So I try not to cross that line too much. That being said, there's a lot of rape. Several of the sex scenes are non-consensual, and rather graphic and rather violent. Those two are the chapters that are going to be marked, because that's the biggest worry I have for people going into this, is that, rape's a pretty heavy topic, and it's something that, a lot of people have bad experiences with. One of the rape scenes is very realistic. One of them is rather fantastical. I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but the more fantastical is the more violent one, I guess. So those warnings will be in the description. It will not be on the top line, because then everybody could see it, but I will put it in the description so that you can know and you can avoid. Both of those scenes are very well telegraphed. So if you want to start reading the chapter, and both of them take place kind of either in the middle or at the end of the chapters. So if you want a telegraph, that's something I can also put in the description. I'll probably just put a timestamp of when those scenes take place, so that you can just skip past that particular section of the chapter as well. One of them just ends with it. One of them, it's in the middle, but there's important information after it. So I'll try to mark that out as best I can. I'm not going to put it in a super visible place, just, again, because I don't want to spoil other people. But just check the descriptions before you watch episodes. They'll be there. I promise. But yeah, so thank you all so much for listening to this whole video from me ranting for 50,000,000 years. I'm very excited to unveil this project. I'm very excited for you all to experience it. It's something that I'm very proud of. It's not something that came very naturally to me, but I think it worked out really well in the end. I'll probably have a big Q&A about the story once it's done being published. That'll be a live stream of some description. But for the time being, I'll be doing weekly uploads every Friday. I hope to see you all soon for Das Vadanya. Have a great day, everybody. Goodbye.